I don't know how to write this, so I'm just going to dump it out. Maybe someone here will know what we saw, or maybe this is just how I start thinking about it all the time. Sorry if this ends up long or disorganized. I used to do deep sea work, not scuba or anything like that. I'm talking submersibles, full descent rigs, pressurized cabins, research contracts, pipeline checks, geological surveys. The kind of jobs that send you a non-disclosure agreement before they even tell you the client name. I did it for about 10 years. After COVID, things got scuppered and staff reduced, so I just do office work now. It was mostly boring. Some cool stuff and some creepy stuff, but it was nothing I couldn't explain, until this one particular dive. The dive in question was in March 2017, I think. It was off the coast of Chile, way south, and almost into Antarctic waters. We were chartered by a group calling themselves Argento Geothermal. Never heard of them before. Couldn't find much about them after. I think they're defunct now. I suspect the reason I couldn't find much is because they were probably a shell company. All the money and paperwork was real though, which is the only thing that mattered to me. All the ethical shit isn't my business. It was clean though too. Too clean if you've done this work long enough. They hired us to investigate a suspected vent field at the base of a deep trench, about 8,000 meters down, which is already ridiculous for manned ops. They said they needed visual confirmation, no ROVs, no autonomous subs. Said something about direct human observation being critical. They were very specific about this. That should have been a red flag, but money talks. There were 3 of us, me and another operator, Alvarez, in the sub, and Reeves running topside comms and telemetry. The sub was a 2-seater, custom modified for low visibility thermal mapping. Launch was smooth. First 4,000 meters were routine. Somewhere around 5,500, the water went dead quiet. I mean completely. Usually, even in deep water, there is background noise. That stuff like creaks, distant bioacoustics, static from the hull. This was like flipping a switch. Even the mic picked up nothing. We ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. It was just quiet. Like the water wasn't water anymore. Temperature started dropping fast after that. Way faster than ambient conditions should allow. I've never seen readings fall like that without some kind of coolant leak, but there was no pressure drop, no misting, nothing. Just dropping digits and visible condensation forming on the inner frame of the cabin viewport. At 6,800 meters, the light started to behave strangely. The forward beams were cutting out in these little half-second flickers. We had no kind of electrical problems that were visible, so that didn't make sense. Then Alvarez saw the grid. At first I thought he was seeing things, maybe low oxygen or a screen glitch, but he marked it out on the nav display. A series of faint light points, barely visible through the water, in a perfect line stretching downward. Then another line, then a cross pattern. Dead even spacing. Nothing organic does that, nothing natural either. We slowed the descent and kept eyes on the formation. The lights weren't flashing or drifting, they were just fixed points, faintly pulsing every 30 seconds or so. They were coming from the trench floor, or below it. And right at the center of the grid was what looked like a hollow, a cavity or borehole, darker than the water around it. When we passed 7,900 meters, the sonar cut out completely. There was no static or bounce back, it was just gone. That is impossible. Even in a flat-bottom trench, you get some return. We tried recalibrating, then rebooting the system. Still dead. Then the forward camera dropped to grayscale, and the pressure sensors started giving us conflicting readings and contradictory data. Spikes and dropouts, like we were in a pressure inversion. We thought it was sensor failure, but there were no signs of a mechanical fault, which makes no sense. Alvarez wanted to hold position, said we could run passive scans, maybe drop a tether probe, but the tether arm did not respond. Neither did the auxiliary lights. That's when we realized the system wasn't failing. It was like it was being interfered with selectively, like something knew what we were trying to do and was stopping us one tool at a time. I told him we were aborting. He didn't argue. Neither of us said it, but I think we both had the same feeling, that we were being watched. Not by an animal or a drone or anything like that. It's hard to describe, but just watched from inside the trench. The ascent took longer than it should have. Cabin temperature stayed low, dangerously low, even after we rose past 5,000 meters. Alvarez started shaking. Not from cold, but something else, like he was trying not to panic. I asked if he saw anything in the viewport on the way up, and he just shook his head once, real slow, like he wasn't sure. Back on the surface, Reeves looked spooked. He said telemetry had gone dark for 23 minutes, just cut out completely. When it came back, we were already ascending, but the logs didn't match. The dive clock said we were under for just over 3 hours. The ship clock said 5.5. They pulled us straight into medical, said it was standard. They didn't even ask about the dive, they just ran bloods, vitals, EEGs, like they were expecting something. After, we pulled the external data. It was corrupted. Not just missing, but scrambled, like whole segments had been overwritten with noise. There was one frame though, just one that did not match the rest. A single still from the forward camera. It showed the trench floor. Just the plain sediment, but there was a shadow on it. It wasn't ours. It was something huge, with lines running through it, straight angles, too regular to be rock. No one said anything. Reeves quietly ejected the drive and handed it off to a guy who I did not recognize, who'd come aboard with the Argento reps. We never saw it again. They paid us in full, signed off the job as inconclusive, and that was it. I haven't taken a deep contract since. Alvarez quit entirely. I've tried calling, but his number doesn't work anymore. Heard from someone he moved out of the country. I still dream about the flickering lights and about the way the cold felt. Not like temperature, but like being looked at by something that didn't understand what I was. I've been hesitant to write this down. It's not something you talk about, not really, but the memory won't let me be, and the silence from the others, especially after everything, makes me feel like I'm the only one left holding the weight of it. This happened about 2 years ago. I was part of a small team on a classified deep-sea mission. Officially, it was a collaboration between NASA's lesser-known oceanographic branch and a private energy contractor. The company had a drilling platform in the Indian Ocean that reported structural damage way below the surface at about 11,500 feet. And that's deep, deeper than most of us have ever worked. The surface was calm the day we launched. The sky was overcast. We left port early morning from a naval dockyard with our deep submersible rescue vehicle locked and loaded. It wasn't your typical DSRV, which is reserved only for rescue and can usually only reach about 5,000 feet, but I will be calling it that for convenience sake. It was a prototype, repurposed from a rescue chassis, but retrofitted by NASA for deep site biological and structural survey. It was compact, pressurized, and barely large enough for 4, but we had trained in tighter. 4 of us were inside. The pilot, a biologist, the systems engineer, and me, who was overseeing biological assessment. We were all ex-Navy divers before NASA recruited us. We were used to pressure, darkness, and isolation, but nothing quite like this. The descent was slow and precise. The DSRV that we were using is designed to handle crushing pressure, but as we sank, the weight of the ocean pressing against the hull was almost palpable. Inside, the lights were dim. The hum of the life support system was a constant background noise. The pilot was giving quiet commands as he guided us downward. Visibility was crap from the start. Sediment clouds kicked up by the currents or maybe by the rig itself made the water murky, almost opaque in places. Our floodlights barely pierced the gloom. Even with the exterior cameras streaming back to mission control, the images felt claustrophobic. Time slowed down. I watched Ortega monitoring biological sensors, her eyes flickering between her instruments and the feed. Chen was glued to the systems panel. The rig loomed ahead, a dark monolith that was barely visible. The damaged section was at the base, where several steel struts anchored the platform to the seafloor. When the pilot edged the DSRV closer, Ortega immediately spotted it. The metal was twisted and bent, but not torn or corroded. It looked like it had been cut cleanly and precisely. We froze the footage and zoomed in. The edge of the brakes were sharp, like someone had taken a giant blade underwater and sliced through the steel. It didn't match any damage we'd seen before. No erosion, no fatigue fractures from the pressure or time. Something else had done this. Before we could analyze further, a shift in the water caught Ortega's eye. "There," she whispered, pointing to the grainy feed. The camera caught a flicker, a blur, moving behind the rig's legs. "Sonar is flickering," Chen said. Then the screen died. Blackness swallowed the image. The emergency backup kicked in, but the feed was spotty. Then, out of the black, something moved. It was enormous. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine the darkest abyss you've ever seen, and this thing was darker still. Blue-black skin that drank light, mottled, and rough like barnacles, and scars over a giant cephalopod's flesh. Tentacles, too many to count, each thicker than my arm, gliding through the water. Ortega started whispering about suction cups, but they weren't normal ones. They were lined with something sharp, like tiny teeth or barbs. This was no ordinary squid or octopus, it was something else. The creature didn't just flail or attack blindly. It was probing and testing to see how we would react. One tentacle brushed a strut, then the sub itself, feeling for weakness. The pilot slowly backed the DSRV away, but the creature was patient. It wrapped a couple of its massive arms around the manipulator claws on the sub, squeezing and pulling. The sub's alarms started going off. Systems failing, sensors going dead one by one. Chen was frantically working the console, trying to reboot comms, lights, life support. Ortega was screaming over the intercom. "It's grabbing the viewport. I can see its skin, it's disgusting." Then the lights went out completely. In the darkness, the only thing I could hear was Ortega's scream, broken and static-filled, then silence. The pilot scrambled to engage emergency ballast release protocols, fighting the sub's failing systems. I could feel the sub shudder, shaking like it was being crushed in a vice. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature vanished. It just let us go. To this day, I have no idea why. We broke the surface, shaken and exhausted. Ortega was missing. We searched for hours, but there was no sign of her. The official story later was equipment malfunction and accident. I was debriefed 4 times. Each time, the questions were more about protocol than what we actually saw. They never asked about Ortega. Nobody mentioned the clean cuts on the rig, the failed sensors, or the claw marks on the ship's hull. The pilot quit the next day. Chen started having nightmares. He told me he could still hear clicking noises, like the sonar picked up, even when he was alone and the ocean was miles away. Me? I can't sleep. The memory haunts me. I keep thinking that whatever it was, it's still down there. I mean, how did Ortega even go missing? How was she even pulled out of the sub? It doesn't make sense. There are still so many things down there that we don't understand. Things that I don't think we will ever understand. I'm writing this here because of anonymity, because I don't want this linked to my real identity. What I'm about to share is classified and beyond the pale of anything you'd hear on the news. This wasn't just some deep-sea recovery or scientific mission. It was more than that. What you would call a black site operation. The way they tried to bury this shit, you would not believe. I could get this shit suit out of me or worse, just for fucking posting here. About 2 years ago, I got pulled into something I still can't fully explain. I'm a commercial deep-sea diver, used to offshore oil rigs, cable repairs, and the occasional scientific dive. I thought I had seen strange stuff in my time. Things, creatures nobody has catalogued, equipment failures that felt like something was watching us from the darkness. I even encountered the so-called black diver phenomena that is said to happen when you're deprived of oxygen down there. But this mission, it was on another level. It started with a phone call from an old contact, someone I had not heard from in years. He told me that there was a classified operation needing experienced divers with deep water training and the ability to follow strict protocols. No questions, no leaks, but a fuckload of money. I was flown out immediately to a remote military base somewhere in the Arctic Circle. I had to be vetted and other things of course, but I'll skip all of that. In reality, it took months to even be approved. The location was so far north it barely even registered on public maps. At the base, nobody would tell me much. No briefing papers, no mission outlines. Just a stack of NDAs and a handful of brief verbal instructions. The whole thing felt like a ghost story, except it was painfully real. The icebreaker ship we launched from was a converted military vessel, stripped of all civilian markings, with a hull reinforced for polar ice conditions. The crew was almost exclusively military. There were Navy divers, engineers, and specialists with security clearances I could not even begin to understand. The atmosphere was tense, like we were sitting on a powder keg that nobody wanted to touch. Every crew member was tight-lipped, eyes darting to every shadow, every crackle on the radio. The Arctic winds outside were vicious, and the ice sheet stretched endlessly above us. Our submersible was unlike anything I'd ever worked with. It was a deep-diving titanium sphere with multi-layered hulls, built to withstand crushing pressures well beyond what commercial subs could manage. It had a bank of sensors designed to map terrain, analyze chemical signatures, and scan for biological life. But those sensors started malfunctioning almost immediately as we approached the dive site. The orders were simple. Descend beneath the ice to a precise coordinate, locate and retrieve a sensitive asset, and return without incident. No deviations, no questions, no communications, except encrypted updates back to command. The descent was slow and deliberate. The water outside the viewport turned to a dark twilight, fragmented by the thick ice miles overhead. Ice cracks above sent ghostly patterns of light flickering down. The deeper we went, the more it felt like descending into a crypt. At roughly 4,200 meters down, the terrain shifted abruptly. Instead of natural seabed, we found a massive, carved-out crater that looked impossibly artificial. At its center sat an enormous structure that defied explanation. It looked metallic, but pulsed like flesh. We had no idea what we were looking at. We weren't sure if a vessel or something else. Just a hulking mass of corroded metal, slick with a strange biofilm that pulsed faintly under the sub's floodlights. Our sensors started acting up near it. Electronics flickered, instruments overloaded, and even the cameras distorted with static and shadow. Whatever this thing was, it did not want to be observed. The closer we got, the more it seemed to resist, like the ocean itself was fighting us off. The commander ordered us to begin retrieving. At this depth, simple cables will be impossible with the massive pressure, but our vessel had a deep-water crane system and tension-compensated winches, usually reserved for sub-recovery. They rigged it to lift the asset in one slow, groaning pull, but as soon as it latched on, the whole structure groaned like a living beast. The sea trembled around us. Then we heard it. Well, we felt it. A deep, guttural vibration resonated through the water. The icebreaker above shuddered violently, alarms blaring all around us. Our comms suddenly went dead. For minutes we were blind and deaf in the crushing blackness. They only sound the muted hiss of our life support systems and the low groans from the structure beneath us. Then movement. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow glide past the viewport. It was huge, too large for any creature I'd ever seen. It moved deliberately with slow movements, as if observing us as much as we observed it. No one spoke. We finished attaching the cables and triggered the retrieval sequence. But even as we ascended, that sensation did not fade. It felt like something was watching from below. Back on the icebreaker, the mood was somber. Nobody joked or relaxed. The commanders refused to reveal what we'd pulled up. Whatever the asset was, it was wrapped in layers of secrecy so thick that even most of the crew were kept in the dark. I was debriefed under strict guard and told not to discuss the mission with anyone. But I can't stop thinking about what we saw. That structure was not wreckage. It wasn't natural. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you do and you want to hear more, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below, as it lets the algorithm know that you like my content and it promotes it to more people. My goal for the channel is to hit 50,000 subscribers, and we're closing in fast, so thank you, and back to the stories. I've been diving commercially for over a decade now. Stuff like oil rigs, underwater inspections, salvage, just the usual. You get used to the dark, the cold, the isolation. But one dive still haunts me. We were working off a remote coast, inspecting an old sunken shipwreck at about 18 meters down. Nothing unusual on the surface. The day was clear and the water was calm. But once we hit the bottom, the world changed. The wreck was an eerie skeleton, the metal twisted and corroded, strewn across the seabed like bones scattered in the sand. I was diving with a buddy, Steve. We kept close, checking the hull and mapping damage. The water was cold and dead silent. There was no fish and no movement beyond the odd swirl of silt. Then Steve stopped moving. I glanced over. He was staring at something just out of sight, his body rigid. I called to him on the wired comms, but no response. I swam closer, and then I saw it. A small metal box, almost completely buried in the sand, with a faded plaque. It was the name of the ship, but scratched out and replaced with the word unstable. I tried to pull it free, but it was stuck fast. Then I noticed the box was humming, like a low vibration that was almost imperceptible, but definitely there. I could feel it running through my body. Steve's eyes widened, and he started signaling frantically. Get out, now. Before I could ask why, the water shifted. It wasn't a current, but more like a pressure wave, like a sudden shift in water movement. I grabbed Steve, and we started ascending. Back on the boat, I tried to get a look at the box through the surface, but it was gone. Just vanished. No sign it had ever been there. Steve refused to dive again for weeks. Me. I'm not sure what we triggered down there, but I will never forget the feeling of that silence and that weird hum-like feedback. I was part of a small salvage crew hired to recover a cargo container lost during a storm off the coast of Nova Scotia. Depth was around 120 meters, nothing we hadn't done before. The container was believed to be full of industrial equipment, so no reason for us to expect anything out of the ordinary. We dropped the ROV first to locate the container. The feed came back clear. It was sitting upright on the muddy floor, partially buried. Visibility was not great, but it was enough. We prepped for a dive the next day. The dive went quiet as soon as I hit the water. The cold was brutal, and the gloom settled like a weight on my shoulders. The only sounds were the faint hiss of my regulator and the distant creaking of the ship's hull. I reached the container and started clearing away sediment with my tool. That's when I noticed it. What looked to me like eyes. Not animal eyes, but human eyes. They looked like they were reflected in the cracked glass of a small window on the container side. I froze. I checked my comms. Nothing. Tried to get a better angle, but the eyes did not move. They just stared. Suddenly, the hatch on the container popped open. My training kicked in. I signaled my buddy, dropped my weights, and began a controlled emergency ascent, but the hatch swung wide, and the current inside the container started pulling water outwards like something massive had been held inside. I looked back at the window. No eyes. I got back to the surface gasping. The captain ordered a full inspection, but nothing odd was found. But those eyes, the hatch opening on its own, something wasn't right. The container was sealed back up, loaded on deck, and taken straight to a secure facility. No one talked about what I saw. Creepiest shit I've ever experienced, to this day. I've been commercial diving for nearly a decade now. Mostly routine jobs like underwater welding, inspections, and maintenance. But there is one dive I will never forget. Not because of some monster or government cover-up, like I'm sure you're used to hearing people make up, but because it messed with my head in ways I still can't shake. It was a deep structural inspection for an offshore rig in the North Atlantic in the late fall. It was the coldest water I'd ever worked in. We were diving to about 120 meters, which isn't unheard of, but pushes the limits on air mixes and bottom time. Our team was 3 strong, me included. The plan was straightforward. 2 divers go down for the inspection, while the 3rd stayed in the bell, monitoring and supporting. I was one of the divers assigned to the inspection. The water was murky. Visibility maybe a meter or 2 at best, and the currents were not playing nice. The rig's subsea legs had sustained some damage after a recent storm, and the company wanted a detailed look before any repairs. We suited up with Trimix to reduce nitrogen narcosis. The decompression profile was tight, with a slow bottom time and carefully staged stops on the way up. We had the best gear. Closed-circuit rebreathers, redundant systems, full comms, or so we thought. Everything was fine at first. We descended steadily. The rig looming out of the gloom as we approached. The metal looked twisted and scraped in places, which was probably the storm's doing. I started the inspection, tapping and scanning welds, calling out readings. The other diver was doing the same, a few meters away. About 45 minutes in, things started to get weird. I began to feel a little lightheaded. Not the usual narcosis buzz, but more like a slow fog rolling in at the edges of my vision. The rig's shadow seemed to warp and stretch oddly. I brushed it off as probably fatigue or a mild CO2 buildup. Then I heard something through the comms. A faint voice, distant but clear. "Hey, did you see that?" I looked over at my buddy, but he was frozen in place, staring at something just beyond my peripheral. His eyes were wide and blinking. His body was rigid. I called out to him, but he did not respond. And then I saw it too. At first it was just a shadow, a flicker in the murky water, but it quickly took shape. It was a diver, a fourth diver, but we were only three on this dive. The figure hovered a few meters off the rig, motionless. His gear was old-fashioned, none of the new tech that we used. His helmet was an old copper design, scratched and dented. His suit looked ancient, coated in decades of grime and rust-colored growths. He didn't move, but I felt like he was watching me. "Hey," I yelled into the comms. "Did you see that?" Still no response from my partner. I reached out to touch the phantom diver, but my hand passed through him like mist. The figure didn't react, didn't blink. He just hovered there, silent and still. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the water. The rig was settling, a reminder that we were still in a dangerous place. I snapped out of it and forced myself to focus. Maybe it was a trick of the light, some sediment caught in the currents. But then my buddy's voice broke through the static, weak and trembling. "Man, I think I'm running low on oxygen." I glanced at my gauge. My levels were fine, but his were dropping fast. He fumbled with his controls, panic creeping in. The phantom diver was still there, watching. My buddy suddenly gasped, eyes darting wild. He pointed behind me. Look over there." I turned around slowly. My heart was pounding. A second ghost diver appeared, further out in the gloom. It had the same vintage gear on, but the same lifeless stare. More solid than a shadow, less real than a man. The rig's metal groaned, loud and unsettling. My breathing got faster and shallower. I tried to tell myself it was just hypoxia, oxygen starvation messing with our minds. It's a well-known risk at those depths, even with all of the safety measures we had in place. But the feeling that we were not alone, that we were being watched by something not quite human, it just lingered in my mind. My partner's breathing grew more erratic. His movement jerked like a puppet on frayed strings. I grabbed his arm. "Come on, we need to ascend." He looked at me, eyes flickering in and out of focus, and he just whispered to me, "I don't want to leave them." "Who?" I asked, confused. "The others. The ones waiting down here." The words chilled me. I wanted to laugh it off, but the cold sweat on my skin told a different story. We started our slow ascent, stopping at each decompression stage. The phantom divers vanished with depth, or maybe we just lost sight in the thicker water. Back on the surface, the medics ran their checks. My partner was disoriented, barely coherent. Later, when I got home and finally started to decompress, both physically and mentally, I did some digging. Turns out, what we saw wasn't just hallucinations. There is an old legend among deep divers, especially those working in extreme depths. When your brain starves of oxygen, it sometimes manifests figures. Ghostly divers trapped between worlds is what some say they are. They call them the Black Divers or the Waiting. Supposedly, they're the souls of divers lost to the deep, doomed to wander the dark for eternity, appearing only to those on the brink of death. Sounds like myth, right? But the details lined up. The old-style gear, the motionless watching, the cold silence. I don't know what we really saw that day. Maybe my partner's hypoxia was worse than anyone admitted. Maybe I was just projecting my fear. But I haven't dived below 18 meters since.